This is the Bevo Buckets podcast on the Burn Orange Sports Network. I'm Will Iger here with Ryan Hopper, and every Tuesday night we'll be on the Burn Orange Sports Network's YouTube channel to talk Texas basketball and some other of the best college storylines in the sport. Ryan, last week was an interesting week from Texas basketball. We saw arguably the team's best win of the regular season and arguably the team's most disappointing performance of the season, starting with a 676 to 65 loss to UConn. Ryan, what were your thoughts on Texas' performance against the Huskies this past Sunday at the Moody Center?
Well, had I not gone home early because I was going to the SEC championship game, I would have been there covering the game for TSTV. And, I was like, I'm going to miss the UConn game. And now I'm kind of like, okay, I missed the UConn game. Like I'm a little more indifferent to it because, at the end of the day, um, the horns came out flat. By the time I was a little late tuning in, that was the day I flew back. By the time I got back and I tuned in, I want to say there was 4 or 5 minutes left in the first half. Texas is down 15, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. And what we have in our we were talking about this pre-show. It just seems like these programs, even though UConn had a 3 game purple patch that we talked about in the previous pod, why they might be vulnerable, these two programs are in completely different places. Sure, UConn may have lost 4 of their 5 starters from their back-to-back national championships, but a lot of those bench guys graduated into being starters, and they're ready for these big games, no matter where they are. They're one starter remaining, Alex Karabam, their leading scorer. He scores about 20 a game for them. He did not play in their home game back in Storrs, Connecticut against Baylor on Wednesday night, and they still beat the Baylor Bears. It was close, but they still won. And Baylor is over the last few years has been a much better program than Texas has. And so I was like, look, so I picked UConn to win, although I said it'd be close, is because they get Caravan out of concussion protocol, plus a lot of these guys who know how to win. Sure, their defense isn't as good, and they might not have a great rim protector, but this is still the two-time defending national champions, while Texas, with Rodney Terry's players, has not gotten out of the second round of the NCAA tournament.
Right. And you mentioned a clear difference in the program. I mean, if you look at this UConn roster, you talk Caravan was really their only starter remaining from last year's team. Solo Ball played great for the Huskies against Texas. I think he had around 16 points, shot 6 of 13 from the field, had 4 threes. He was a bench player last year for the Huskies. He only averaged 11 minutes per game last year. Look at Samson Johnson, starting center. He played behind Clinnigan all year and Caravan for the most part. And this year he sees the floor as a starter, and he played huge against Texas. He was 6 or 7, and he dominated Kane Shedrick in the low post. So that's just one area where Texas dominated UConn dominated the Horns. And other aspects where you can of the game where you could um really you could see how UConn was a dominant team from start to finish and a more dominant program just through their energy. UConn was ready from the jump of that game. The bench was on its feet. Even the fans in the crowd were arguably louder than us in the student section. I mean, not much to cheer for from Texas, but that's one way. And two, offensively, they got a good look every time down the floor. Hurley's constantly calling plays. The team and its players, they're always in movement on the floor. And that's a little bit different from the way Texas operates on the offensive end.
Oh, certainly. And you mentioned Mr. Ball, Solo Ball. He had a big game. It's just funny that given his name, you'd think he'd have a much bigger place in the Texas offense, which plays solo isolation ball. That's what happens. And I just, I thought that was a funny observation. He was very good from three, and like you said, they share the basketball. That is what good basketball teams do. That's what you need to do on offense. If you share the ball and get your spacing right, if you have any talent at all, which they obviously do, Dan Hurley's a really good coach, you are going to get more often than not good results. I mean, I thought at times the Texas defense was lackadaisical, but at the same time, you got to credit UConn for having them in constant motion, and the results show. They shot 52% from the floor. That's hard to do in any true road game, but especially against a team in Texas that we're going to go through them, and we have gone through them, has its problems, but this is still a pretty good Texas team that could find itself back in the rankings pretty soon. Um, to do that against anybody is impressive, and I think it's a testament to the program that Dan Hurley's built. I mean, Liam McNeely, the freshman who's picked up a lot of the scoring slack since Caravan was out, he only put up 4 shots and scored 7 points and turned the ball over 3 times. But he did other things to help the Huskies win. 7 defensive rebounds, 9 rebounds in total. Terrace Reed was getting active off the glass, off the bench. And I think part of that is, and we'll get to this later, and we've said this every pod, Texas does not have the requisite size to compete against the literal big boys and the metaphorical big boy teams.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's been an issue past 2 years under Terry or 2 full years. And it was an issue under Chris Beard as well. We saw them, Texas being undersized, playing Christian Bishop at the 5 position alongside Dylan DeSue. And he loved Dylan DeSue here at Texas and in Austin. Had a great March Madness run 2 years ago, but he was still an undersized big man, and you felt it against good teams. And we felt, or Texas fans felt it on Sunday against UConn. And I think there's this notion that Dan Hurley is an old school head coach and he likes to, pound the ball inside, and just the way in which he talks to his players, and he's constantly yelling and getting in officials' ears and his players' ears. But honestly, he's really adjusted this UConn team to have a modern play style. And one thing we talked about was ball movement, right? The way they pass and cut. That's modern play style comparison to some NBA teams do it, just like the Warriors did it was when Steve Kerr first started there as a head coach. And the second thing is the looks they get from the field, specifically the corner three, the best shot in the NBA in the game. If you're an NBA team, you're constantly looking for ways to get the ball to your corner 3-point shooters. And UConn did that on Sunday, and they got good looks. They weren't just, it's not like they were contested corner three looks, they were wide open looks. And with the
That's key. Yeah. Sorry to cut
and
you
with the
off.
and then the movement that carries over to the defensive or offensive end for Texas. If you're Trey Johnson, you're running Liam McNeely off pin down and trying to guard him off pick and rolls, and when he's cutting and passing, then you got to get the ball on the other end and you try to go ISO ball. And Trey Johnson did get hot in the second half, but it tires him out and it tires his legs out, and that's going to hurt, especially if he's going to rely heavily on the 3-point and mid-range jumpers.
Well, and with how much they rely on him late, like you said, they got to figure out some kind of, I know this isn't the pros, but like lack of a better term, load management with him, or getting good defensive matchups against him, against guys who don't move particularly much or aren't good as like ball handlers. But the thing is, when you're playing a good team like UConn, that's pretty much everybody. Because as I said, every good offense is spacing, movement, ball distribution, keeping the rock hot. That's almost every good offense beneath the NBA level. And even at the NBA level, you see that from a lot of the best offenses. Um, yeah, this was just a tough game from Texas from the start. They could never really find their way back into it. Now, and it kind of makes it. I wonder how you feel about this. It kind of makes that 11-point final score deceiving. I mean, UConn led by as many as 20. They led by 18 coming out of halftime. They led by as many as 20 in the second half. I mean, this wasn't particularly close, and it felt like whenever Texas could try to, get back into the game, and maybe they needed a big shot to go in to cut it from an 11 to an 8-point lead, and it almost never went in. It just always felt like UConn was able to maturely, because even though they have a lot of new blood, they are a veteran team with a veteran coach. They were able to maturely keep the Longhorns at bay at a safe arm's length.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the amount of points UConn was up. This game wasn't in single digits. until this game, the last time this game was in single digits was with around 12:40 left in the first half. And from then on out, this game was no competition. Texas made it a little bit interesting in the second half, as we stated, but it never really felt like the Longhorns had a chance. And that was very unfortunate considering the fact that Texas was favored in this basketball game and with the struggles that UConn has had this year. But I guess that just goes to show you how much improvement or how much room for improvement there is within this Texas basketball team. We'll get into a little bit later, but if they're going to struggle here against a quality program like UConn, how about when the conference play starts in the SEC and you have plenty of teams who are currently ranked ahead of the Longhorns just in your own conference? And they got till January 4th, where they travel to College Station to face Texas A&M. December, they don't really face any quality opponents, but it's going to get very interesting down the line. That being said, Ronnie Terry's teams have gelled and gone better as the season's gone on.
Well, and you'd hope there'd be some gelling, not just that's a good point about the history of Rodney Terry's teams here on the 40 acres, but it's also the fact that any team, I mean, man, this many new players, new transfers, you need time to gel. Now, the flip side of that coin is though, they better gel at Texas because a lot of their competitors have a few transfers or just as many key transfers as Texas has. What if they raise their level up a notch? Does Texas have to really ramp up their level and their team cohesion? Because right now, they are not running enough offensive sets. I feel like, and I think, for time purposes, we should probably move on to the big win in Raleigh. I feel like those rock fights, the game ended 63-59, really good quality win away from home in a hostile environment. Yes, this isn't exactly the same team that NC State team that made the Final Four this year. No DJ Burns, no Casey Morcell, but they still have, I believe, two starters from that team. And the Horns took care of business. But my concern is with how they play offensively, especially on the road where it's tougher, that their only path to victory is these, low scoring rock fights. And I want to know what you thought about that.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I guess so far in the season that's been the case, but I feel like this team has the capability of having offensive firepower. I mean, we haven't really, outside of Trey Johnson, we haven't really seen enough from the rest of the team offensively. I mean, Jordan Pope last year for Oregon State was their leading scorer on a decent team in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 in basketball last year is actually a good conference.
Oh yeah.
Tremont Mark, he's just returning from injury. I guess you could say he's been a disappointment recently, just kind of really hasn't found his footing, but he was supposed to be a big lift for the Texas team offensively and just hasn't really shown up yet. So I think that there are definitely other ways for this Texas team to win basketball games outside of the low scoring affairs like we saw against NC State. We just haven't seen that yet. And my question is how do they get there? Like what needs to happen? Is it a change in play style? Is it more involvement, more shots for Pope, Mark, Paluma? Paluma's been great offensively. Sorry, we didn't mention him. That's my thing because I think they're capable of the big offensive nights. I just don't know how yet and what they'll need to do to get there. And we didn't really see that against NC State, but it was still arguably a very good road win against a decent team in the ACC.
No, and they did what they had to do. Key stops, especially at the end. Very, I have my problems with Shedrick, but very, big block there. Did exactly what coaches tell you to do. Kept his hand straight up. Did not foul there. That would have been a very costly foul. That NC State guard, even though it's high pressure free throws, probably makes both of those, and then you're almost more than likely going to overtime unless you hit a buzzer beating shot. They they really held on. And I respect that because I feel like that's what Rodney Terry's teams can tend to do. The question is, can they win one of those games where it's almost like who's got the ball in their hands last? Can they win a shootout that goes into the upper 70s or into the 80s? Can they win one of those? because in conference play, I mean, we're going to get to this soon. It's going to be a gauntlet, Will. And I'm just concerned that maybe they can't. I think one thing they need to do on offense is, me saying, oh, they got to run sets. Well, that's a simple thing. Specific thing, run stuff with off ball screens for Kaluma and run pick and pops for Kaluma. He is not getting enough opportunities to shoot threes. Yes, they need him by the basket to rebound. Yes, he I believe was the team's leading rebounder, and yes, he had 15 crucial rebounds, including 4 offensive ones in Raleigh. But he's also was brought to Austin because he is a really good scorer and specifically a volume shooter from three. He's a good shooter from mid range too, but the analytics will tell you that's not the efficient shot. The efficient shot is to get him open 3-point looks. They've got to get this man going. An encouraging sign, though, as we pointed out before the show, is could have been Jordan Pope's best game as a Longhorn. 5 for 9 from the field, 3 for 5 from downtown. Missed a free throw, but he's a good foul shooter. 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 turnovers, 13 points. Not a bad game from Jordan Pope as he gets used to this more facilitating role.
Yeah, and he had the highest plus minus on the team with a plus 10 there. It's funny, we were just talking about what ways for Texas to kind of improve offensively, and I think it does have to start with Pope and Mark, and both actually had their best nights of the year. I mean, that's not saying much considering how they've played against North Carolina State. Problem is, outside Johnson, they didn't really get a lot of much help offensively. I think that will come from Kaluma. He had a rough shooting night, was 3 for 11 against NC State last Wednesday. But Kaluma, you're right. I mean, he can shoot the three ball. He's 45.5 from three on the year, 54% from the field. And I think if you could see a little bit more of that from him and a little more maybe set, you should talk about pick and pop. He should start that pick and pop with Pope to start every offense, then go into the dribble handoff with Trey Johnson to really get things going there. And if that first look for Pope or Kaluma off the pick and pop isn't there, then you head it to Johnson for dribble handoff. He can get in the offense the rest of the set. And I think that is what is Ronnie Terry needs to see more from his players. It's considering, they haven't gotten much from Pope. That being said, Pope was great in transition. He pushed the break. He had a couple, I think two off ball 3-pointers, one from Johnson on a fast break, and one in the corner with around less than 10 minutes left in the game. And defensively, he was great too, as you mentioned before the show.
Well, and then another encouraging sign is, you know, Trey Johnson, again, not a decent shooting night, not his best shooting night, but we've talked about before, he doesn't let that impact him at the foul line. He actually did not go to the line at all against the Wolfpack, but he hits that big dagger three at the end that it didn't end things for the Wolfpack, but it gave you a reasonable confidence that Texas was going to win that game. I believe about 140 left in the game. He hits a big three. Um, and that's a big shot regardless, but it's a huge shot in this game that is a close rock fight. Texas got out to a good 15-6 run in the game's first 4.5, 5 minutes to get started. And you're thinking, oh, is this going to be another blowout by an SEC team over an ACC team? And we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. But then the Wolfpack make it tight. And this, I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that this staff was able to make the right subs and push the right buttons to keep this a tight game from the 15-minute mark of the first half to the very end of the game. Neither team led by more than 4 points. Will, this game was tighter than Big X the plug trying to fit into a middle seat on an airplane. This was a very good win for Texas, but offensively they have to figure some things out. And I think something that we missed, I think they used this a little bit in Raleigh, but something we missed from the home game against UConn, just because they don't have size doesn't mean having Shedrick and Big Z on the floor at the same time is a good idea.
No, and that's an offensive nightmare. I mean, they were playing Shedrick and Big Z too with Kendall Weaver against UConn. And I'm looking at it like there's the three guys on the floor who can't shoot the basketball. So as a defense, that makes your job a lot easier. You know this probably better than anyone. I'm assuming if you played the wing or the big, but you can really shrink the floor, and that makes things so much easier to guard. And I expect Terry to move away from those two playing together. Interesting, Jason Kent's come back from injury. I heard he did against UConn, but he didn't really see the floor. And I'm thinking, well, this guy's 6'8" and he can shoot the three. You got two other guys out there who are 6'8", 6'9". They can't stretch the floor. Why not throw Ken in there for a couple minutes here and there? He can defend too.
He may not be 100%. They may want
That's
to eat, they may want to do what they did with Tremont Mark and ease him back. They know that the schedule lightens up here. We'll give you a brief preview of Texas's tangos this week against New Mexico State and Arkansas Pine Bluff, who each visit the Moody Center this week. I think that's where you ease Kent back in, make sure he's 100%. He's been hurt since that Mississippi Valley State game. They're still focused on making sure they have a fully healthy roster heading into the SEC gauntlet that starts in the new year.
right. So I guess you're right there. But hopefully Jason Kent can get some minutes on the floor. His fellow Indiana State transfer had a great start to the year. Hasn't been great in the last two games against UConn and against NC State. He was a -9
Mm.
against NC State, and against UConn, the turnover problems were just apparent. He cannot take care of the basketball at all. On the day, he had three turnovers, four fouls, led all Longhorns in fouls, and was 0 for 6 from the field. And Ronnie Terry continued to lead on Julian Larry over Jordan Pope, primarily for defensive reasons. Larry's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer. Pope, undersized guard against Sandiara, arguably one of the best guards or experienced guards in the country. So I get that a little bit. But Julian Larry is going to need to pick it up as well and continue his good play from the start of the year rather than his performances in the last two games.
Well, absolutely, because there's a role for Julian Larry on this team. He had a very good UKG Legends Classic in Brooklyn. I thought he actually may have been when you consider how I know Trey Johnson had some late heroics in that too, but when you consider how Trey Johnson shot the basketball, you can argue Kaluma and Larry were the two best players for Texas and Brooklyn. I mean, Larry was taking minutes from Jordan Pope. He was trusted to bring the ball up, break that press against St. Joe's. He did that well. He was trusted to get Texas into their sets, which I thought he did well. He played good defense in those games. He frustrated that very good guard from St. Joseph's and made him have, to date, still his worst shooting night of the year. So there's definitely a role for Julian Larry on this team. There is got to be a role for Kent on this team. And when you consider the difficulties that Texas has with some of its big men and the fact that you're absolutely right, you can shrink the floor. So maybe, yes, Kent is a slightly undersized four, slightly, but if he can expand the floor for you, that does wonders for your offense because I think Caden Shedrick thinks he can, Will, but this man has a hit. I don't think he has hit 1 3 this year. I could be wrong. He went 0 for
He
1.
shot one on Sunday.
He shot one on Sunday, went 0 for 1. He shot multiple in Vegas. I mean, I think he might have been 0 for 4 in Vegas against Ohio State. I don't even think he hit a three against any of the, little conference, mid-major conference opponents. This dude has just got to work on finishing around the basket.
Right.
It makes me think of that viral Patrick Ewing clip where when Patrick Ewing was coaching Georgetown and the camera goes into the timeout and some dude had shot like a crazy step back three and he turns to the guy, he's like, man, when you practice that shot? I've never seen you practice that. You know what I'm talking about? He's like, when? And he's like, Coach, I practiced that shot. He was like, when you practice that shot? Man, it just made me. It went like kind of viral. You guys
Yeah,
could find it
yeah,
on
I've seen it.
YouTube. It's from like 5 years ago when he was still coaching there. It just made me think of that. Like, and Kendall Weaver too. Get on the free throw line, Kendall. Get your 500 shots up a day or whatever it takes. We love your defensive energy. We love your team ethos. Shedrick, we like your rim protection, but they got to know their roles and they got to know what shots are good for them and what aren't.
Right. I completely agree. And it seemed like the team kind of knew its roles against a win against NC State. UConn, a little bit of a different story. Texas had success against an ACC team like NC State, and so did the rest of the SEC last week on Tuesday and Wednesday night. SEC teams went 14 and 2 in the ACC SEC Challenge, 8 0 at home. And funny enough, two of the three highest ranked SEC teams at the time, number 2 ranked Auburn and number 4 ranked Kentucky, they've lost their ACC matchups. Auburn at Duke in Cameron Indoor, obviously one of the toughest places to win, and Duke's first big win of the season after losses to Kansas and Kentucky. And Kentucky, they got upset by a Clemson team, and that Clemson team, well, we all know what they did last year in the tournament, making the Elite Eight, and they have a really good program. And it was a tough place to win up there in the basketball version of Death Valley. And Brad Brownell knows what he's doing. And he's arguably one of the best coaches in college basketball. So Texas won against NC State in the ACC, and so did the rest of the SEC. Ron, you have any thoughts on SEC's dominance in college
Well,
basketball and over the ACC?
I never thought I'd say this, but I think I'm gonna declare this here and now. Um, No, I won't go that far because honestly, the challenge I would have liked to have seen, granted, I don't think anybody thought the SEC would win 14 of the 16 games, even like Commissioner Sankey himself. However, you could have definitely seen the SEC winning this challenge. I mean, you saw coming into this year, we're looking at this conference, we're saying, yo, like this is starting to look a little bit like the gauntlet of the SEC football schedule. Only on this one, you got to play everybody, and you got to play everybody twice. Um, I mean, this is a really, really good basketball conference. This is not your older brother's SEC where Florida's good, Kentucky's good. Before Bruce Pearl got to Auburn, they weren't any good. Before Coach Oates got to Alabama, they weren't very good. This is not your older cousins, SEC, where there's maybe three or four good teams and you kind of know who they're going to be, and there's some truly bad teams. I mean, you got programs. I mean, first of all, not just the SEC Challenge. This season, the SEC, a football conference, is 43 and 15 against the other Power Four conferences, the ACC, the Big East, the Big Ten, and the Big 12. I think the only other conference that top to bottom can even come close is the Big 12, also a very tough basketball conference. So, this puts the SEC in a very interesting position. In this super conference era that we're supposedly going into of college athletics, they are the real power player because in the two sports, really the only two sports that turn a profit at almost every Division One school, the SEC is the only school that is one of the super conferences for both. In football, it's the SEC and the Big Ten, and in basketball, it's clearly now, I think, the SEC and the Big 12, unless the ACC turns it around and gets their act together. And now, and also the KenPom ratings, which are usually pretty reliable for looking at who's going to be successful in March and who's going to be high seeded in March. The SEC is half of the top 12. I mean, that's something you'd only see from like SEC football if those ratings existed for football. And would you like me to run through the projected March Madness seeding, Will? Granted, this is way too early and before SEC play.
Go for it.
Okay. This is insane, more than I would have thought. According to bracketologist Joe Lunardi of ESPN, the Auburn Tigers are the number one overall seed as of right now. Uh, the Tennessee, the Vols, are the number two overall seed, are another one seed right now. Kentucky and Alabama each projected on the two line. The undefeated Florida Gators are projected as a third seed right now. in the ACC SEC Challenge, they dumped 87 points on the Virginia Cavaliers, most against the Hoos in 129 games. That's 4 seasons, Will. Texas A&M is projected as on the 4 line right now. This is a big surprise. Not a traditional basketball power in any sense of the definition. Mississippi State, Stark Vegas, baby. They are 8-1. They're 3-1 in Power Five games, and they just blew out then number 18 Pitt by 33 in the SEC ACC Challenge. They out rebounded them 49-27, outscored them 52-14 in the paint. It was a 90-57 final score, arguably the most significant victory for the Bulldogs, possibly in school history, as crazy as that sounds. But this isn't a traditional basketball power. They're projected as a 5th seed. Their in-state rival, Chris Beard and the Ole Miss Rebels, are projected as a 6th seed. Oklahoma projected as an 8th seed. And finally, all those teams later, Texas projected as a 9th seed, projected to play Maryland, and star freshman Derek Queen, who's averaging well over a double double. And interesting fact about the Terps, they also have Julian Reese, who is none other than Angel Reese, the Bayou Barbie's sister. Granted, again, these are way too early projections. Conference play hasn't even started. And even Georgia, who is someone that we didn't really talk about in our season preview for the SEC when we looked at this conference, they're projected as a 10 seed. So that is 11 of the 16 SEC teams will projected to be in the field of 68. And this is with Lenardi leaving out Arkansas and Coach Cal and the Razorbacks, which I think may be an oversight because typically his teams, come into form in January and February during conference play. I mean, if it wasn't for the Big 12 being so good, this would be the basketball conference in the nation. So
Yeah,
Texas has a gauntlet coming up in SEC play.
right, and it starts with Texas A&M, and then they host number 2 ranked Auburn and number 2 ranked Tennessee at home in back-to-back games. I mean, if that's not a gauntlet, I don't know what is. And it's unfortunate that they actually played those 2 teams at home rather than on the road. So on the road, you're like, well, might as well Tennessee, Auburn, tough place to win. Texas might lose those. At home, you're like, holy cow, like Texas has to take advantage of their home court advantage in the Moody Center and get wins against good programs like a Tennessee, like an Auburn, even in Arkansas with Coach Cal when they come to the Moody Center at the end of February or mid-February. And Texas teams can have a problem. When you talk about the SEC being dominant in basketball and football, I mean, this isn't our forte. Shout out our folks on the Burn Orange Sports Network at the Behind the Dish. How about baseball too? The sport that probably drives in maybe behind women's volleyball the third most amount of money is baseball. And last year you saw A&M face Tennessee in the championship, and Kentucky made a run, and Florida made a run, and LSU and Texas and Vanderbilt are 3 of the best programs in college baseball. Um,
Absolutely.
so the SEC is just dominant on all levels in the new super conference era in college sports. Moving on from the SEC to the next upcoming games for the Longhorns. Texas will face New Mexico State on Thursday night at home, 7 p.m. Central, and they will face Arkansas Pine Bluff on Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central. Texas is heavy favorites in both of these games and should win both. Ryan, not much here on both these teams, but anything you want to ask or talk
Well,
about when it
so,
comes to these games? Are
this
we
is
are we back for another little game here by
yeah,
you?
I think this is our Bevo's Buckets tradition when it's a much smaller team from a much smaller conference in at times foreign place to both of us. I do some research and I quiz my co-host Will. I got to make a name for this game. Maybe like, I don't know, who's that team? I don't know. No, that's not a good name for it. I'll get a new one for next week because these cupcake games will continue for the rest of the 2024 calendar year. So, Will, I asked the same 3 questions. Maybe I'll add a fourth for next week about all of these small mid-major schools. Will, who is New Mexico State's mascot? What conference are they in? And can you give me a famous New Mexico State alum?
So New Mexico, you're not going to get me in this one. I've spent my fair amount of time in New Mexico, traveling through the state. I've driven through it, taken a
Okay.
train in there. My train out of New Mexico got delayed, so I spent a little bit more time in New Mexico than I would have hoped. That being said, New Mexico State's mascot is the Aggies. New Mexico's mascot, this is the Lobos. I was
Oh,
almost
extra
confused.
credit.
I
Okay.
was almost confused there for a second. Conference, I believe New Mexico. Oh, I know New Mexico's in the Mountain West. I'm hoping that New Mexico State is also in the Mountain West. Are they?
That is what I thought. And I was surprised to learn that they are not in the Mountain West with their
Big Sun,
in-state
their Big
rival,
Sky,
the Lobos. That's another good guess. I'll give you a third guess. It's not the Big
the
Sky.
Sun, the Sun. What's the Sun Conference?
The Sun Belt?
Sun Belt.
That's a great guess because it's sunny there. No, for some reason, they're in Conference USA, one of those catch-all
I don't know if
conferences.
they're worth it. I don't know if they're that
Yeah,
good.
I don't
So
know.
it might be one of the
Any
bottom tier.
guesses for famous alums? I have a lot. I actually have more than I thought written down. Shout out to the Aggie education at New Mexico State. They've actually produced some notable people who have done notable things, though I knew none of their names. However, Will, there is one person in the sports world that you, I, and everyone listening to this pod knows that is a famous New Mexico State Aggie.
I was hoping you wouldn't say sports world, but any relation to Texas?
No,
No.
no,
What's
he has
that?
not played professional ball in Texas.
Maybe he's on the media side of things.
No, no, still playing, current player.
Basketball.
Yes, I'll give you that. Yes, current NBA player.
Um,
Every NBA fan knows this guy's name. He's not the biggest star, but everybody knows him. Had a pivotal role in a recent NBA championship winning team.
oh, it's OG Anunoby played New
That's a
Mexico State.
great guess. No, no, that's a great guess.
Pascal Siakam.
It's Siakam. It's Siakam. There you go.
I
I
need a
was
couple
shocked
clues.
he is the New Mexico State Aggie. All right, real quick, running the 2 minute drill. We got about 150 left on
Pine
our.
Bluff. I'm not gonna get. I don't think all three. I don't know if I'm gonna get.
Okay, the nickname, you were doomed. It's the Golden Lions. Perhaps they were
It's a good one.
inspired by the Wizard of Oz. It's a cool one. Also, a quick relevant basketball note. They're 2-8 on the season. New Mexico State is 4-5 on the season. So if one's going to be tougher than the other, it should be New Mexico State. Um, this conference is going to keep stumping you like Chuck gets stumped on who he play for on TNT. This is another
Tom.
HBCU from the SWAC, which is the Southern HBCU Conference. I don't blame you for not knowing that, though. I didn't know this school existed
They
until I
got a
looked it
famous
up.
Arkansas Pine Bluff has a famous alumni.
Not really. No, this one's really hard. They have a couple of guys who have made it to the NFL. They have, I didn't even know who this was, Big Tuck, who is a Dirty South rapper. Big Tuck. And they got Johnny Harris, who is the current coach of the Auburn women's basketball team. So, no, they really don't have any famous alums. I knew you'd never get that. I wouldn't have got that either. But hey, I thought I'd give the Golden Lions their flowers.
Didn't
So
get that, but should have got the Pascal Siakam with New Mexico State. That being said, Ryan, it's a great podcast. Great to be back with you this week on an edition of the Bevo Buckets podcast on the Burn Orange Sports Network. I'm Will Iger here with Ryan Hopper. Thank you all for joining. Hopefully, we'll be back next week, but if not, enjoy your holidays. Thank you, everyone.